Hey guys, and welcome to another tutorial in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 in the Airbus A320neo. Today we're going to be looking at perfecting your landings, something which is a hot topic on all of the flight sim forums, and what pilot doesn't love to make that perfect smooth butter landing when they finish a long flight. So what we're going to do is look at a few things you can do to help improve those all-important landings. So at the moment we've just taken off from Nice in the south of France, and I'm basically just flying a small traffic pattern here so we can get realigned up back with the runway. We're going to make a Cat 1 ILS approach. This is not a tutorial on ILS approaches, although I may do one of those in the future if there's a call for it. This is literally going to be a tutorial talking about those last few hundred feet from the runway, what you can do to make sure you get that perfect centerline landing and at a good landing rate. Now, before we go any further, there are just a couple of things that I do want to mention in the setup. So if we just come out of here and head to the controls, what I found in Microsoft Flight Sim very important is that if we just go to so this is my side stick, and then we go over to the sensitivity settings. Let me just check that you can see my my mouse cursor here, otherwise you won't know what I'm clicking. There we go. Okay, yeah, so in the in my side stick settings, click on the sensitivity bar, and what has become very important is that we get these dead zones that you can see I've got set up here, and they really are, because as I rest my hand on the side stick, you can see that it's moving ever so slightly. So we've got our lateral and vertical movement. I've also got rudder control as well. But as I'm just resting my hand on the side stick, you can see that it is putting some inputs in. Well, I don't want any inputs, so I'm just resting my hand on the side stick naturally. So set those dead zones up so that it's not affecting anything, so that even when I let go of the side stick, you can see that's nothing. And there we have a little bit of movement, but I'm not actually moving the side stick at all. It's just the natural weight of my hand on the side stick. So set those dead zone settings up, because that will help you with those very minor small corrections that we have to make on final approach. Okay, so now that's done, let's get back to flying. Okay, so just going to start making the descent so we can capture the glide slope in a few moments. And whilst we're doing that, we'll be able to talk about what we're going to do and what we're expecting the aircraft to do as we enter the final approach stages. So we've got our dead zones set up, that we've just talked about, and three things that I'm really going to be looking for. Well, there's more than three, but three very important things is, as we touch down, we want to, or just before we touch down rather, we want to make sure the aircraft is nice and stable on a good approach path. We need to make sure that we're at our final approach speed, something which will be managed by the aircraft's auto thrust, and we also want to try and have level wings. Now, it's all well and good saying that in a nice normal flight with no crosswind or whatever, but level wings means that you're obviously touching the main landing gear wheels down at the same time, and you're not sort of putting the left or the right one down first, which can sometimes give you not just a hard landing, but send you off slightly in a different direction. So I like the aircraft to be fully stable and configured by at the very latest 6 miles out. This is a Cat 1 approach, which means at 1,000 feet we're going to turn the autopilot off. So okay, I'm just obviously chatting with you guys, I'm just keeping an eye on this approach as well. What I'm now going to do is enter the approach phase, and that should start slowing the aircraft down for us. Okay, yeah, so at 1,000 feet we're going to take the autopilot off, and the first thing we need to do when we take the autopilot off is not panic and don't make any quick major adjustments on the side stick, because we don't need to. The aircraft's attitude is memorized almost, if you like. It's already auto trimmed, so the aircraft should, depending on wind factors, the aircraft should just continue its approach as it was doing without any great extra input from you. You may need to make very, very small minor corrections, and I can't stress that enough, small minor corrections, for if the wind's slightly blowing us off centerline or anything like that. And then as we get a little bit closer, we start to see the runway coming into sight. What we're going to be looking for is crossing the threshold, and the threshold is, you know, the big white lines right at the start of the runway. They look like piano keys. We want to be crossing that threshold at about 50 feet. We get that 50 feet call out, don't we? You're probably very familiar with hearing 50, 40, 30, 20, hopefully not as fast as I've just read that out. So there are a couple of things that differ slightly from the real aircraft than as they do in Microsoft Flight Simulator's aircraft. Well, of course they are. One costs millions of pounds, one costs about £100. The standard operating procedure for, well, certainly for Easyjet, which is the airline I simulate flying for, is at 30 feet. That is when we reduce the thrust and start the flare. Now, there have been a few times where reducing the thrust that late, there's sort of like quite a strong ground effect comes into play a little bit, and I'm sure you've all heard about the dreaded wing wobble. Either one wing dips left or right. Well, thankfully that's something which you can avoid, and that is again all about having a stable approach. And as we hit 50 feet, I tend to start pulling the thrust lever back there. I say in the real world you do it a little bit later, you do that at 30 feet. One of the things that does tend to happen, and I see a lot of people not complaining about it but certainly mentioning it in the forums, is that what you do get is when you get to about 50 feet, the nose of the aircraft starts to pitch down a little bit. Well, believe it or not, that is what the real aircraft does, and the idea behind that is to give the pilot sort of a natural feel for wanting to flare his aircraft and pulling back on the side stick. So if the nose starts to go down, don't panic. And it's easy to say this now, but when we actually get over the threshold, you've got 50 feet before you come into touchdown, so it all happens very quickly, doesn't it? But it should actually, that is exactly what should happen. From 50 feet, the aircraft slowly lowers its nose so that you, as the pilot, then get that sort of feeling, that reminder, whatever you want to call it, of feeling the need to flare, which of course we do need to do. It's very, very easy to flare too soon, and if you flare too soon, what tends to happen is you don't touch the runway, you end up sort of flying very neatly over the top of the runway and never actually letting the wheels touch down. So try to resist that urge to flare until at least you hear that 30 feet call out. If you hear the call outs coming too fast, 50, 40, 30, 20, well, then your vertical speed is a little bit too quick, and it takes a little bit of control at that point to pull back on the side stick, not to flare the aircraft, but just to slow that rate of descent. Okay, so I'm just going to pop on the approach mode as we come to intercept the ILS. So our final approach speed we've got down here is 128, which seems nice and steady, so we should get a good steady approach. I'm using live weather today as we come into Nice, so I believe it was a Cat 1 visual landing, but we'll find out. Our minimum descent altitude anyway is 211, and when I took off from the airport a few minutes ago, that was perfectly acceptable. Okay, so what I am going to do is just turn the weather down on there, so that in fact, you know what, I'll turn the weather off, just so that we can see the ILS display clearly. There we go. Okay, so we're 30 miles out, we're about to capture the glide slope. As I say, this is not an ILS tutorial as such, but if you do want to see one of those, then leave a message in the comments and I'll see what I can get done for you. Okay, so I'm going to pop the gear down and we'll go full flap. So we're basically getting configured nice and early for this approach. Okay, so we're on profile. One of the things that you can start looking out for now is just look at the descent rate that we've got on our display here. So we're descending between 700 and 800 feet per minute, which is normal for a 3-degree glide slope. We're nice and slow. We're at our final approach speed. And this is looking like a good, stable approach. Okay, so the plan is, I'll go over it quickly once more. We want to be fully configured and stable by 6 miles. Well, I would consider us to be fully configured, certainly, or full flaps down, gear down. So we're already fully figured. We're looking very stable. At 1,000 feet, we would be looking to take off the autopilot, but not making any major adjustments to the angle of the flight path. So we can have the hand on the side stick, that's fine. We've set up those dead zones, so you're not going to put any inputs just by resting your hand on it. And then as the runway comes into view, we just want to be making very, very small corrections, just if the wind's blowing us off course. However, luckily this morning I'm looking at the wind indicator just here, and there seems to be very little wind, so that's lovely. So we're aiming to hear that 50-foot call out as we cross over the threshold of the runway, those big white piano keys. You then on the runway, just quickly talk about the runway markings. You've got an aiming point to touch down, and that's the 2 big white boxes that you have after the piano keys, and then you've sort of like got dashed broken white lines which indicates the touchdown zone. As long as you land the aircraft within the touchdown zone, then all is well. So at 50 feet, hold the attitude. There's the runway. Wonderful. Always a nice view, always a nice sight. Okay, so at 50 feet we're going to hold the attitude at the aircraft. We're not going to start pulling back. You will sometimes, particularly if you're new to the aircraft, you will want to pull back straight away. If you do, you risk skipping off the runway and off you go again, sort of thing. So don't pull back on the side stick at 50 feet. You can start to reduce thrust at 50 feet in this simulator. It's a little bit earlier than what you would normally do. But you certainly, by 30 feet, you want the thrust lever to be down at idle, so you can move it quickly. Don't think you've got to reduce the thrust slowly. Pull it back, cut it, and then at 30 feet we're going to lift the nose of the aircraft up slightly, just to get a good flare. So about 5 miles. And there's some great scenery here, isn't there? One of the reasons I chose this airport for the approach. And it's early morning as well. This is real live weather, so we've got a little bit of mist this morning. Incidentally, if you do decide to copy this, and that would be great, that's what I'm hoping people do. If you do decide to copy this, don't try and do an ILS approach on runway 04 right. The reason being, and I see a lot of people again talking about this in the various forums, the reason being is runway 04 right has an offset localizer, so it wouldn't point you at the runway, it points you slightly offset of it. I'm just changing my camera position. That's the position I like to be in there. Okay, so I'm now flying manually, but if you look, even though we've taken the autopilot off, we're not moving. So you're doing a quick scan. You're scanning, looking forward for the runway, but you're also scanning and looking down here. Make sure none of this changes just here. You want to know that you're still on that perfect glide path, which we are, descending 700 feet per minute on the glide path. And it's looking very good. 100 above means 100 above the minimums. We don't need to worry about minimums, we can see the airfield.
Minimum 200.
Just raising the nose slightly to keep us on profile. Not too much though.
100. 50, 40, 30, 20, retard.
And now just hold it there. Do not. There we go. I was going to say, do not be tempted once you put the aircraft into that flare position. Do not be tempted to push the nose back down. If you do, that's when we can end up with a problem. We've got a brakes hot warning there. Okay, so I'm going to just very quickly recap over that, because obviously I was concentrating on the landing and not talking you guys through that. But at the last couple of seconds, if you rewind, you'll see I raised the nose ever so slightly just because the aircraft started to descend below the glide path. Remember, you're in an Airbus, you only need to raise the nose slightly and then you can let go of the side stick. If you continue to pull back, the aircraft will continue to push up, and we did get very slightly high on that approach, so it was a slightly higher approach than I would have liked. When that happened, I lowered the nose a little bit just to get us back on profile. We heard the 50 feet call out. I then started to pull the thrust levers back, make sure we were idle by the time we got to 30 feet, and then I raised the nose. And at that point, that's the point where you think, oh no, I've raised the nose a little bit too much. Well, you haven't, because you cut the thrust to idle. The aircraft will descend. It does take a moment though to descend, perhaps a little bit longer than you'd be expecting. But if we have a quick look out, you can see we landed well within the touchdown zone, which finishes just here. So as long as you land within that touchdown zone, then all is well. Okay guys, I hope you found that useful for practicing your smooth landings in the A320. One of the good things to note though is that there was no wing wobble of any kind, was there? Because we got that nice, steady and stable approach as we went over the threshold. If you like this tutorial, please do subscribe to the channel to get notifications of live streams that take place during the weeks, and of course new content. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye bye for now.